My name is Nora Callahan, and I turned 34 at my mother's dining room table. The candles weren't even lit yet when my mum leaned toward my dad and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch it. "Since everyone's here, have your son changed the locks at her apartment?" Her apartment. Mine. The one I bought with my own money. "The one my 7-year-old son sleeps in." My dad nodded without looking up from his plate. My brother Colin set down his fork, murmured something about a phone call, and walked out with his keyring. My family kept passing the potatoes. I smiled and complimented the pot roast. 1 hour later, Colin came back through that front door with a face the colour of hospital sheets, leaned down to my mother's ear and only managed, "Mum, there," before the sentence died. Here's what nobody at that table knew. I already understood exactly what was waiting for him in my parking lot, because I'd spent 6 weeks quietly building it, ever since a declined debit card at a pharmacy counter sent me pulling a thread that ended inside a folder in my mother's china cabinet. Before we get into it, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if stories about family, betrayal, and hard-won boundaries speak to you. I work nights in the ICU, which teaches you to stay calm while everything beeps. I'd bought my own condo 3 years earlier, the first door in my life that was only mine. And my son Noah was 7 that summer, learning to ride his bike in the parking lot while my retired deputy neighbour cheered him on. My mother has planned every holiday my family has ever had, but she hadn't thrown me a birthday dinner since I was 12. When she suddenly started calling twice a week about this one, I told myself people soften with age. 2 days later, a pharmacy card reader would tell me otherwise. Growing up, I was never really daughter in that house. I was the fixer. I did my parents' taxes every spring starting at 19. I managed my father's pillbox. When anything broke, the phone rang in my pocket. And my mother had a phrase for it. That's what family does. The one thing I never handled was my own paperwork. My father kept a grey file box in his den from the time I was 18, holding my birth certificate, my social security card, everything important, and I liked believing someone else was minding the deep stuff while I worked double shifts through nursing school. I paid my bills on time and never once pulled my own credit report. You don't audit the people who taught you to ride a bike. It took one declined card at a CVS counter, my son's ear infection medicine, the reader flashing declined, a line of strangers behind me, to start unravelling 12 years I never saw coming. That night, after Noah was asleep, I finally signed up for credit monitoring and read my own file like it belonged to a stranger. There was a credit card on my report I'd never opened, balance $4,800, 60 days past due, the exact account that had just humiliated a woman with a spotless payment history over a $14 prescription. The billing address on file wasn't mine. It was my childhood home. I called the bank's fraud line, filed a 90-day alert, and asked for copies of everything. The contact phone number listed on the account was my parents' kitchen landline, the same one they'd had since I was a kid. I remembered suddenly a letter about a strange credit inquiry when I was 27. Months after Noah was born, I'd brought it to my parents, and my father had produced a bank apology on official letterhead that looked just slightly off, the logo a shade too blue. My mother had patted my hand. "Bank error, sweetheart, your father already handled it." I'd let it go. 7 years later, sitting in my kitchen, I finally let myself finish that thought. Over the next few nights on a break at work, I pulled my full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. 40 pages, read the way I read a crashing patient's chart, fast first, then slow. It wasn't one card. It was 9 accounts stretching back 12 years, cards, a department store account, a $12,000 personal loan, paid off and closed. None of them mine, all wearing my name like a borrowed coat. The first account had opened the same month I moved out of my parents' house at 21, fresh out of nursing school, proud of my new apartment key on its own ring. Someone had waited for me to leave and opened a door behind me with my own name on it. Every single account listed the same mailing address for statements, not my apartment, not my condo, my childhood bedroom, where I could never see the bills and someone else always could. I built a caseboard on my kitchen table, green tabs for accounts, yellow for dates, red for anything touching money in motion. The totals came out cold and specific, over $19,000 in open balances currently sitting under my name. I wrote down the only 2 people who'd controlled my documents, my mailbox, and that landline since I was born, scratched the names out, and wrote them again with a hand that wasn't steady the second time. My parents. I chose the quiet road. No confrontation, nothing changed in my voice, Tuesday dinners as usual, but I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus with a pin only I held. 2 days later, my mother called, annoyed, saying a bank verification for my father hadn't gone through. My invisible brand new freeze had inconvenienced her within 48 hours. It was a personal loan from 2019 that stopped me cold. Opened, used and closed the exact month my son was born, while I was in a hospital bed with a preeclampsia diagnosis, unable to stand without help. Someone had signed my name across town for $12,000 while I was learning to nurse my newborn. That week at family dinner, I mentioned lightly that some of my mail seemed to be arriving at their house by mistake, and could they hand it over unopened going forward? My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Family doesn't need permission," she said and speared a carrot. Not a denial, a policy statement. On my way to the kitchen, I spotted a soft, worn manila folder tucked under napkins in the china cabinet, my mother's hand, closing the cabinet door before I could look closer. The birthday planning got stranger from there, she asked out of nowhere. Whether I still kept my important papers in that little grey fireproof box, whether anyone watched my apartment while I worked nights, and offered generously to keep my son overnight the night of my party so I could relax. Every alarm I'd ever answered as a nurse went quiet and cold at once. I told her Noah already had a sleepover planned, which became true with one phone call. Monday morning, instead of sleeping after my shift, I drove to the county recorder's office with a hunch and $2, and the clerk handed me the answer, a general, durable power of attorney, granting my parents full authority over my accounts, loans, and property, signed and notarized on the exact day I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk to the bathroom on my own. A good signature, confident, looped exactly the way I loop it. I paid for certified copies. A power of attorney is a skeleton key, and once I understood it existed, 12 years of accounts suddenly had a spine. Every card, every address change, all of it sitting downstream of one forged piece of paper like towns below a dam. Then things turned present tense. My credit union's loan officer mentioned offhand that another lender had recently run a verification and asset check on my condo. Routine underwriting language for something new being built in my name, unfinished. I wasn't investigating a crime anymore. I was interrupting one. My retired deputy neighbour came to me first. A grey sedan had circled the lot twice that week, and the driver had photographed my locks, both doors. He'd written down the plate out of old habit. It traced to a locksmith company. I told him everything, and he said the single most useful sentence anyone had offered me in 6 weeks. You don't need a shoulder. You need a case number. I filed an identity theft report with 2 names listed as the people who'd used my information, then took it to the local financial crimes unit, where Detective Reyes read my binder in silence for 20 minutes before asking one question that changed everything. Who else had copies? She flagged one page differently from the rest. A verification request meant this wasn't history. It was a case about what my parents were doing right now, not what they'd already done. Days later, she called with the full picture. An $85,000 home equity loan was in underwriting against my condo, application signed under that same forged 2019 power of attorney, scheduled to close and fund that Friday, 2 days after my birthday dinner. My mother had told me the deadline herself, wrapped in cake talk 10 days in advance. The bank's fraud unit quietly froze the loan from the inside, dead, but invisible from the outside, so the people who'd built it would have no idea they were already standing on broken ice. That week I also found, tucked in the same folder, my late grandmother's final bank statements, 2 years of small. Steady withdrawals under a caregiver card. Right up until 4 days before she died, money quietly bled from the one account my grandmother hadn't managed to protect, while she'd fiercely guarded a $40,000 CD that later became my down payment. I understood finally that my mother wasn't just stealing from me. She was collecting the same way, from everyone who trusted her. Under everything, a locksmith friend of my neighbour's confirmed a Reiki job booked for that Wednesday evening, my birthday, at my address, ordered by a woman describing herself as the family's property manager. My birthday dinner wasn't a party. It was an alibi being thrown for me. The night before, going through the folder photos one last time, I found the piece that changed everything again. A hard credit inquiry from 5 weeks earlier, run not under my name, but my 7-year-old son's. The plan hadn't just continued, it had a new chapter, and the chapter was my child. I froze his credit at all 3 bureaus that night, something every parent listening should know they're allowed to do. On my birthday, I dropped Noah at a friend's for a sleepover, emptied my real firebox into a safe deposit box downtown, filled the empty one with expired coupons and blank paper, installed a new deadbolt and a doorbell camera, and drove to my parents' house wearing what I privately call my nurse face, warm, level, giving nothing away. Detective Reyes had unmarked cars positioned outside my building by 6, with one simple rule for me. Don't warn them, don't stall them, just be an ordinary guest at your own birthday dinner. I ate the pot roast, drank the toast my mother gave about how everything you have came from this family, and smiled through it, because 2 people at that table knew exactly what her sentence meant, and only one of us was checking the kitchen clock. Mid-dinner, a message came through from Reyes. The notary's file. Cleaned up at last, showed the second witness signature on that forged 2019 power of attorney belonged to my own brother. And 9 days later, an $11,000 truck loan of his had been paid off in full from my parents' account. My brother had sold his testimony against me for a truck he'd been bragging about at every dinner since. When the candles finally came out, my mother leaned toward my father and repeated the sentence I already knew was coming. Since everyone's here, have your son changed the locks at her apartment? My brother left with his keys. An hour later he came back grey-faced, and the whole table heard him say, before he could finish, that police had been waiting at my building, that they had a warrant, that they knew about Friday. The room went silent. Then my mother turned, not to my father, not to my brother, but straight to me, and understood in that instant exactly who had stopped being managed. She stood, chair barking against the floor, and demanded to know what I'd done. I stayed seated, kept my voice level, and told her the truth. I hadn't called the police on my family. I'd filed a report about 2 people who forged my name while I was in a hospital bed having her grandson, and slid across one page, showing a credit inquiry run on a 7-year-old. My father, grey and still, said the only fully honest sentence I've ever heard him say out loud. She's telling the truth. All of it. I stood up, took the leftover birthday cake off the counter on my way out, and drove the 15 minutes home with the windows down. Charges followed in the weeks after: forgery, fraud, and theft. My brother cooperated as a witness. The $85,000 loan never funded, and my name came off 9 fraudulent accounts, one red tab at a time. These days my mail comes to exactly one address, mine. I open every envelope the day it arrives, which sounds small unless you've lived a story like this one, in which case you already know it's the whole prize. If this reminded you to pull your own credit report, or to freeze your kid's credit today, take that as your sign. If someone you love needs to hear this, share it with them, and I'll see you in the next one.